he has many, many awards, but we can add to that list 7 National Emmy Awards. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. John Quinones.
Oh, thank you. You guys can hear me here, right? Are we okay right here, or should I get the podium? All right, good. Well, it's good to be here. It's fun. I've never been to San Angelo, I don't think. I was in El Dorado when I was covering the Warren Jeffs story a couple of years ago. But I'm from San Antonio, so I'm a native Texan, born and raised. Went to St. Mary's University there, and then went to Southwest Texas State in San Marcos, which is a town nearby. Worked in radio. Started in radio broadcasting because no one would hire me in television when I was getting started. An internship. So, I mean, I think if you take anything from this morning's conversation, it's that get your foot in the door with any kind of internship in whatever field you're going to go study, because it gives you a sense of what that business is like, whether you like it or not. You know, you'll find out. And also it gets your name in front of the people who hire folks, and there may be room to excel, to advance. Even at the show that I do, What Would You Do in New York, we hire a bunch of interns. Unfortunately, you have to live in New York, obviously. But, you know, they quickly advance, many of them, to producers. It's a show that quickly educates young minds like yours and allows them room to expand. So it's been fun working with young staff at What Would You Do. That's also where some of our best ideas come from, people like yourself. I'm a reporter, I think first and foremost. I studied journalism, and at Columbia University I got a master's in journalism in New York. Worked in radio at the beginning, and then I was a local reporter in Chicago, and then joined the network as a correspondent for Peter Jennings back in the 80s when Central America was a big story. They were looking for someone who spoke Spanish because ABC had a correspondent who was flown from New York to cover the war in Nicaragua. There was a civil war going on in this little country in Central America, Nicaragua. And the guy didn't speak Spanish. So he lands, this correspondent, and if you Google him, Bill Stewart, you'll still see this horrific thing that happened to him. He was sent from New York to cover the war in Nicaragua, didn't speak a word of Spanish, hired a translator at the airport to translate for him, a young Nicaraguan kid who spoke English, and he said, "Hire me, $100 a day, I'll be your translator." Well, unfortunately, Bill didn't realize that the guy had long hair, or didn't notice, or didn't pay attention to the fact that the guy was about your age, had long hair, blue jeans. He looked like the rebels that the government forces in Nicaragua were fighting. So he looked like these troublemakers, these rebels, these leftist guerrillas. So when they stopped him at a military checkpoint, the soldiers were very suspicious of this kid, and they pulled him out of the van, and they said, "You look like a leftist rebel, we're fighting those guys," and they took him behind a hill and they killed the translator. Unbeknownst to the correspondent, Bill Stewart, who then was trying to communicate with the soldiers, he didn't know that the guy, this translator, had been killed. So his camera crew from afar thinks it's funny. They didn't also know that the translator had been shot. So they start rolling on it, right? From about 50 feet away. And on camera, you see Bill Stewart being told by the soldiers to get down on his knees, and they put a gun to his head, and they assassinate him on camera. The camera crew panicked and grabbed the tape and ran out and made copies and gave it to CBS and NBC and CNN. Usually we don't share our material, right? We're very competitive. But at that point, you want the world to know that this journalist was killed. I tell you this long-winded story to explain why then the network said, "No, we need someone who can speak Spanish to go to Central America." And there I was in Chicago saying, I want to be a network correspondent. So I covered Central America for about 10, 12 years. Had a blast, going to places like El Salvador and Cuba and Panama. I was there during the invasion of Panama in 1989. And to this day, I do a lot of stories in Latin America. If there's ever a big story like an earthquake or a hurricane, I'm the first one to say, I want to go. I was in Chile when the miners got trapped down in the mine. Remember in the mine shaft a few months ago, and my blood, my juices start going as a reporter, and it's really exciting to be back in that element where you got to crank out the story and do it quickly and make friends and try to get the big interviews. So there were 2,000 journalists down there, and I got the first interview with the miner. Everyone was trying to get the miners, and I got the first one. And I think it had something to do with the fact that I could endear myself as a Hispanic to their families and speak to them in their native language. And so that helps to this day in Latin America. And I love going down there. I'll never forget the interview we did with this guy. He was the cheerleader for the miners down there. When they were feeling down in the dumps after 69 days, he would cheer them up. We would dance for them around a pole, play, sing music, and Sepulveda, Mario Sepulveda. So when he came out, is that light should be on or not? I think it's blue. When we pulled him out, we said, Mario, after the interview, I said, what do you want to do? We want to take you somewhere, eat, or what? He said, I want to go to the beach. I haven't been to the beach in 3 months almost. So we said, okay. So we drove him like an hour and a half to the beach in Chile, right? The Pacific Ocean. And he brought his little 8-year-old son. And I still have a picture in my iPhone of him dropping to his knees and thanking God with his little boy at the beach. And the rays of the sun are shining down through the clouds, and it looks heavenly. I mean, it looked really amazing. So that was very touching. But then suddenly this guy Mario, his son runs away. He then suddenly strips off all his clothes and runs naked into the surf. So we were rolling on it. So on the air we had to fudge his rear end so you couldn't tell. But he was like a 6-year-old boy that had been released from captivity, and he was playing in the surf. So to this day I do stories like that. When a big story breaks, I'm still on it. A couple of days ago I interviewed Mark Anthony, who told me about the divorce with Jennifer Lopez, which is a big story. So, along the serious stories, I also get to do some fun celebrity stuff. I got to get back to New York tonight because I'm going to be on Good Morning America in the morning talking about the Mark Anthony interview, and you'll see clips of it. And then tomorrow night on Nightline, which is on here at 10:30, I believe, you'll see the longer interview with Mark, which discusses what happened. No one has they haven't talked yet, right, on camera? So this is a big exclusive interview, and ABC's promoting it all day today, saying, you'll hear Mark Anthony's own words tonight, tomorrow morning, tomorrow night. So that's all I'm involved in, and it's still, what would you do? It takes a large, what's the show? The Hidden Camera Show. It's like Candid Camera Ethics, right? Where we see, and it's like a laboratory of human behavior, where we monitor how people react to all these different situations, and it's fun. It's fun. I get to sit behind the scene in a back room, watching monitors, and watching people react on hidden camera to certain things that happen. We brought some clips we can show you. We have till 11 here, right?
10:50.
10:50. Okay, so maybe we'll see some of that. But first, I just wanted to know what questions you might have about what I do. Yes.
What would you do if a student asked you an awkward question?
Oh, we got one of these in every class.
All right, honestly, have you ever done sports stories? Like Alex Rodriguez or somebody?
Oh, why would it have to be Hispanic?
Well, I was just saying that because you yourself to be Spanish, but if you've done a story on Kurt Schilling, I'd be delighted to hear it.
Of course. I mean, I love sports. I love football, too. So I would interview Tony Romo and Mark Sanchez, right? 2 Hispanic quarterbacks. I don't get to do enough of them. I think I'm very proud of the fact that I did the very first network interview with Tiger Woods. This was like 20 years ago. He had won the Amateurs Open, and even then we knew he was going to be a big star. I didn't. I'm not a golfer, but my producer was a big golfer. And he said, John, this kid is amazing. So we interviewed him. We went to his little bungalow house in California. We went on the golf course links with him, and he hit some balls. And
And it was inspiring. We spoke to his father and his mom. It was so sweet because it was so innocent. He was only 17 years old. He's now become, of course, this huge star. So I think that was one of the few sports stories, and I'm trying to remember. Not many, I mean, I do news. ABC owns ESPN. And every now and then we talk about me contributing to E60, which is their news magazine, which is a great magazine, by the way. But I haven't done much beyond that. Yeah. You're not leaving now, are you?
Oh,
Okay.
absolutely.
But you'd be upset. Yes, right here.
Would you recommend, as still being in school, would you recommend leaving your location, like say San Angelo, to go do an internship up in California at a big
Yes,
network
yes.
station?
Or even Houston or San Antonio or Dallas, even in Texas. I think you learn, you grow so much when you live somewhere else. Especially if you go, you're on your own. You will meet different people and your mind expands. I remember when I went to Columbia University, for the first time I met a Jewish person, and an Arab person, and an Irish. When you're in San Antonio, you're black, white, or Hispanic, right? And people suddenly found me kind of exotic. So it was kind of a cool feeling. I think you grow so much from traveling. I would not give anything. I would not take anything in exchange for all the places that I've visited. Your mind just expands. So, and then of course internships are better. When you come from a smaller town like San Angelo, I think the opportunities would be better in bigger cities. I went right away from San Antonio to Houston, and I worked in radio there. And it wasn't a great job. I was making very little money, but it was Houston. It was better. And then from there, I met someone who had gone to Columbia University. I was thinking about giving up journalism when I was 24 years old, because I was working as a radio reporter, making $800 a month, and half of that was for my rent. So it looked bleak. No one would hire me in television because I had no television experience. And everyone had their one Hispanic reporter. It was like a quota, So it looked bleak for me. And I think I was clinically depressed. I remember I started jogging a lot to get out of my funk. And lo and behold, it's funny how life is. I was in an audition for a TV job that I met this woman who had gone to Columbia University. And I told her my story and I said, I'm going to give it up. I want to go to law school or try to get into the University of Houston Law School. And she said, John, if you're going back to school, why don't you go study journalism and get a master's? She said, I went to Columbia and I'll write a letter for you. And she did. And thank God for that. I got to packed up a U-Haul trailer and moved to New York City. Yes.
Okay, I had a question about what would you do. Has you or the crew ever been in danger after a citizen has found out that they failed miserably? Have you ever been in danger and then you're really enraged because they've just been tested?
People are very upset when we break the scene. When I come out and say it's all been part of what would you do, they are fired up. I mean, sometimes they're angry, sometimes they're shaken, sometimes they're really shaking, and sometimes they're crying because of what they witnessed and they thought it was real. And now here I come along and say it was all part of a show. So it angers sometimes some people. So I always give them a little time to settle down and cool off. Sometimes they don't want to sign a release because we have everyone sign a release. But you know what? More often than not, I'd say 95% of the people sign releases. And after they think about it, they come back around. I think I have this ability to calm people down when I come out. I'll usually, if it's a woman, I'll hold her hand. That always works. I'll say, you were amazing. And usually they have it. So I try to calm them down that way. Sometimes we do it where I'm not there, because I can't be at every single taping, right? I mean, I'm there every day, but sometimes the crew wants to start, the producers want to start at 9 in the morning, and I won't get there, because I just did the last 4 days, I won't get there till 11. So they'll start without me, and the producers break the scene. And when I show up, they go, John, it was terrible. It's different when you're not here. Part of it is that they recognize me, so when I come out, people sigh, there's a big sigh of relief. And sometimes there's applause. And now the show is so popular that people, they take it more lightly. When a producer just breaks the scene, people are not very happy.
Yeah, I probably will.
And we have security there also. We have people in plain clothes who are in the hidden camera shoot, ready to stand up. And we talk to them in their ears, the security and the actors. And if it looks like it's getting tense, we'll tell the actors, settle down, don't push it anymore, stop right there, or back away if somebody stands up and wants to get physical. And the security guy is ready to also jump in and say, look, it's all part of the show. Or I'll come in and stop it. So yeah, there have been a few, but it's never got a violence.
Oh, nothing non-combat.
Like this.
September 11th, the 10th anniversary is coming up. I don't know if you've said this on air before, but where were you and what was your reaction on September 11th, 2001?
I was in New York. Yeah, I was at a hotel. I didn't live in New York at the time, but coincidentally, I was there doing a story. And when it happened, I called my desk. We have an assignment desk at ABC, as every network does and every local TV station does, where they know where all the reporters and the camera crews are. And of course, it was chaos at that hour, 9:30 in the morning. The towers, one had fallen and one was about to fall. So I called and I said, I'm here. And they said, great, we're sending a camera crew. Just go down there and find what you can find at the World Trade Center. So we started driving into the area, and everyone was coming out. And that's the real irony of journalism is when everyone is usually the ones going in when everybody's fleeing. It was horrific, and we didn't know what I was going to do. But I met a woman. She was on a payphone, and she was crying. And I noticed her, and I told the camera crew, stop, let's see what's up with her. And I overheard her on the payphone asking, where is he? Have you seen him? We haven't heard from him. Have you heard from him? He won't answer his phone. And she was with two little girls who were like 8 and 10 years old, wringing their hands. And they were very worried. And when she hung up, I said, hi, I'm John Quinones, and what happened? And she said, my husband, he ran the deli in the basement of one of the towers. And this morning he called me and he said that the building was being evacuated. He didn't know why, but he didn't think it was anything big. So he said he was going to stay and put away the milk and the cold cuts and the perishables because he didn't want to lose. It's just funny to think about, right? We get so many false alarms. I'm sure you have false alarms in this building where you think it's not a big deal. Little did he know that a plane had just gone into the building and the building was about to collapse, right? So I said, and what happened? She said, and that was it. We never heard from him again, and it's been 2.5 hours. So I'm really worried about my husband and the little girls that took their father. So I told my producer, maybe this is a good story. Why don't we follow? I said, can we follow you? What are you going to do? She said, we're going to just go as close as we can get to the World Trade Center. We were still like 20 blocks away. So I said, can we follow you? And she said, okay. So with the camera crew, we're going to tell the story about one woman's search for her husband, right? And the father of her two little girls. So we kept walking and walking for about 3 hours, and there was chaos. Police cars, ambulances, stuff falling from the skies. And we stopped at a police checkpoint where the little girl ran up to the police officer, one of the little girls, and she said, officer, where are the people who are wounded being taken? Because she thought maybe her father's hurt, right? And the cop was very dismissive. He said, I'm sorry, honey, you just got to keep moving. You can't go here. I don't know where they're being taken. He was very rude to her, right? So I got a little upset, and I went up to him and I said, officer, with the camera crew, and I said, officer, she's looking for her father. And he looked at me with this stare, this cold stare, and he said, you know what, John? I'm looking for my wife. She's in there too, somewhere. And it made me feel this big to realize, and I realized then, that we affected so many people. So he said, I'm sorry, and we kept walking. We finally got to the place where the wounded were being taken, and there was a checklist there, a person with a checklist of the names of the people who were brought in, right? So the wife, this woman, goes up and she looks, she's checking the list, and with the camera on her, I say, is he here? And she said, she kept looking and looking, and said, no, he's not here. But at that very moment, the little girl cries out, Daddy! And the camera swings around, and there he is, the husband, holding a dog and a cat. He had gone back to the apartment, their apartment, they lived in that area, to get the pets. And the little girl is swinging on his neck, you know. So thankful and excited. And of course, we ran back to that videotape and put it on the air. And Peter Jennings, I don't know if you remember Peter, was a great anchorman who would go 24, 48 hours on the air. I don't know when he took a bathroom break, but so good at just comforting the nation and just talking without any prepared anything. So anyway, he was tired. It was at the end of the long day. He had been on the air live for 12 hours. When he introduced my piece, he had no idea what it was about. And he said, now we have a story of one woman's search for her husband down the road. They said, here's John Quinones. And they rolled the tape, and you see the story all from the beginning to the end. And when the camera comes back to Peter Jennings, this guy who was so cool and so calm had tears in his eyes. And he said, God, I didn't know how that story was going to end. It was a story, it was the only story that day, that awful day, that had a happy ending. So I was lucky enough to tell that story. That was my contribution to my game. Yes.
What is the biggest risk you have to take to be successful in the industry?
Failing, you know. There's a real good chance you're going to fail. And that keeps a lot of us from going and taking the jump and the leap. So that's the first thing we've got to get rid of. Any fear of not making it or stumbling, you know, screwing up. Just get rid of that. You know, we all fail. I mean, the nice thing about starting in local TV is that you can fail and 7 million people aren't watching. That's why it's better to start in a smaller market. And that's always the advice I give to people who want to go into television, for example, is to start in Austin or McAllen or someplace where, you know, for a few months you can learn what it's like to hold a microphone and go on live and stumble a little bit. But beyond that, even if you got an opportunity to go to the network right now, just go for it. I mean, shoot for the stars. I don't know where I got it from because we were not very wealthy. My father was a janitor, and it's not like my family had a lot of experience in aspiring to great things. But I did. And something in me always wanted to go into television and tell stories and broadcast to the world and write stories, and that's what got me here. It was just gumption, you know, the guts, the audacity to try something that the world told me I couldn't do. When I was in junior high, my counselors told me that I should go to metal shop and wood shop and auto shop, and not that there's anything wrong with those wonderful professions, but I wanted to go to college. And my so-called counselors saw me as just another Mexican kid who probably wasn't going to make it. You know, my grades were like C's and, you know, a few B's maybe. But I'm telling you, I was not some great example of great things to come. And I said no. I said, me and my buddy Luis Rodriguez said, you know what, we're going to go to this other high school that will better prepare us for college. It's still a public school, but we're going to make it. And that helped, you know, having friends who believed in the dream the way I believed. Drama classes helped. You know, I was really shy, believe it or not, and I had an accent because I spoke no English when I was 6 years old. When I was 6 years old, the first day of class, first grade, there's no pre-kinder, none of that stuff, you know. We were poor. And the teachers, there was no bilingual education. The teacher spoke no Spanish, and I spoke no English. So I go to class, and I'm sitting there the first day, first grade, 6 years old, and at about 10 in the morning, the bell rings. And of course, it's recess, right? So all the kids run out to the playground. I went home. I thought it was over. So I walked home, whistling, you know. My mother's like, Juanito, ¿qué pasó? What are you doing? It's 10 o'clock. Se acabó, Mom, it's over. I love school. 2 hours. I'm ready to watch television. She grabbed me by the ear and dragged me back. So the odds were stacked against me. if you had told that kid, if anyone had told us that that kid was going to someday be a network television anchorman, they would have, laughed you out of the building. So it was that gumption, the guts, the audacity to say, you know what, I'm going to make it. I don't care what anybody else says. And even when I started radio as an intern, the owner of the radio station was saying, John, you got to learn how to crawl first. After I'd been there 2 years, crawling, it's like, he just didn't want to pay me any more money. But, so you get a lot of negative messages from society. You have to be able to turn them off and just believe in your own heart. Yes?
Of all your awards, which one's your most meaningful?
I won the Robert Kennedy Journalism Award for international reporting. It's not as well known as an Emmy, but Robert Kennedy, as you know, the Kennedy family, were just a wonderful family who helped a lot of people who were, the sort of the lower echelons of society. The Kennedys came up with social programs, the war on poverty. The argument was that the way out of poverty was through education. John Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy. This was named after Bobby, and it's a journalism award given to somebody who goes out and does something for human rights, to correct human rights atrocities. And I did a story in Haiti and the Dominican Republic. They share an island. There's one island. A little piece of it is Haiti. Most of it is the Dominican Republic. All one island. In the Dominican Republic, they produce a lot of sugar. And the workers for the sugar cane fields are often brought over from Haiti. And often they're very young. So little kids at the age of 6 or 7 or 8 years old are told that they're going to cross the border and go have a great job in the Dominican Republic, and they wind up being slaves. So it's modern day slavery. The kids get paid $3 a day to work from sun up to sundown, cutting sugar cane, which is some of the hardest labor there is. Sticky and it's just really, really hard work. And we did a story on the children who cut sugar cane from Haiti in the Dominican Republic. So we got in, we snuck in, and we filmed in the sugar cane plantations and exposed this awful atrocity. Children, little kids, 8 or 9 years old, cutting cane, who had no idea where their families were. They were kidnapped, for lack of a better term. And many of them would spend the rest of their lives doing it. We met an 80-year-old man who had been there all his life. The same thing, cutting sugar cane. Sugar that we buy in this country and use in our coffee, right? So, unbeknownst to us. So we confronted the sugar cane producers who buy the sugar from there, harvested by slave labor, and we exposed that story, and that won the award. So I'm very proud of that. Yes. Yeah, you got it.
Okay. What's been your favorite assignment so far?
Well, that's like asking the father who their favorite child is. Man, there have been so many. I've just been really lucky. I love doing stories like the sugarcane story, and I guess that my favorite the one that got me to prime time in 2020, because prior to this I was just a reporter, what they call a general assignment reporter. So I was based in Miami, and I would go whenever a story broke somewhere. If there was a hurricane in northern Florida, I'd go cover the hurricane. If there was a coup in Guatemala, I'd go cover that. So I covered the space shuttle liftoffs, often from Florida. But I wanted to work for a magazine show, the bigger stories, the longer stories, because as you know, the evening news get to do 2 minutes on the air. This is very short, and you don't get to really sink your teeth into a story. And I always wanted, I think I'm a better writer for the longer stories, and it's just, you get more time. You get 20 minutes to tell a whole story, maybe the whole hour. And I always wanted to do that, but I never had an opportunity because I wasn't one of the correspondents for 2020 or primetime 20 years ago, so, or 15 years ago. So I was in Colombia covering the presidential elections for Peter Jennings in the evening news. And often when we would go down there, the story would never get on the air. They'd say, go down there, and if we're interested, tell us what the story is. And if we like it, if we have room in the show, we'll take it. or if somebody gets shot. If a candidate gets killed, then you'll get on the air. But if nothing happens, you might not. And that was frustrating. We'd have to get on a plane and get all the way to Colombia, film for 3 days, and then we'd call New York and they say, nah, we'll take a pass. Something happened in Yugoslavia today, or the Middle East. So anyway, I always wanted to work for the magazine shows like I do now. And I was in Colombia covering the presidential elections, and I saw some children running into the manhole covers in the streets of Bogota, the capital. And I said to the person who works with us in Colombia, I said, what's going on there? And she said, oh, those kids are called gamines. They're like little street runaways and castaways. Nobody wants them. They're troublemakers. They're 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, and they live in the sewers. And I said, wait a minute. They live in the sewers? He goes, yeah. They open up the manhole covers. They have a world down there to themselves. There's 300 of them. But they're not good kids. They steal your necklace by day and your watches from the tourists. And John, they're dangerous kids. They're not good kids. And the cops, to try to eliminate them, they will often open the manhole cover. They don't go down there because that's their world down there, right? It's scary. But the cops just pour gasoline and then throw a match down there and try to burn them out. And I said, you've got to be kidding me. She said, no. There's a man named Jaime Jaramillo, and he's got a whole album of these pictures because he helps them. I said, we have to meet this guy. She said, okay. So she took us to meet Jaime Jaramillo, who is this wealthy industrialist who said he makes a lot of money. He made $250 million a year finding oil for U.S. oil companies in Latin America, but he couldn't sleep at night knowing the children were sleeping in the sewers next to the rivers. You can imagine a waste down there, disease. So he would go down there every night with a loaf of bread and a bucket of chicken and a 6-pack of Cokes, and he would try to feed at least some of the kids, and they loved him. So I said to him, and he showed me pictures of the kids who had been burnt. And I'm telling you, their faces were like candle wax, and they had melted from the fires that the cops would do to try to eliminate them. So I said, can you take us down there? And he said, yeah, I'll take you. So we could only go with him because they trusted him, otherwise he might turn on us, these kids. And I told the story of the sewer kids, the kids who live in the sewers. I think that was my favorite story because the morning after it aired on prime time, American viewers like yourselves watching across the country sent $1 million in donations to Jaime and his orphanage. And the kids were all pulled out of the sewers. Now they have their own orphanage. Some of them are taking tennis lessons in Florida, and skiing in Colorado. But it's a beautiful ending. And I learned then that, that's what I love to do. Those are the stories that I love to shine a light on. I think as journalists, I like to liken my profession to someone in a dark room with a flashlight. And I'm the guy with the flashlight. And I can shine it anywhere, right? I want to shine it on the darkest corners of that room where injustice is happening, where corruption is happening, where human rights are being violated, and give a voice to people who don't have a voice. Wealthy people, companies, politicians, they can always call a press conference and get the cameras here to come and listen to them. People who are poor, the peasants in these countries, the children who live in the sewers, the children who cut sugar cane in the Dominican Republic, they have no voice. And unless someone shines that light on them, no one will know the hard lives that they have. So that story not only won an Emmy Award, but it got me in the prime time. And I love those stories. Yeah, right. We got to give you a voice. You do. You don't stop yourself from getting emotionally involved. I mean, I can't be a bawling wreck on the air, but you have to feel something. Because if you don't feel, then how will your audience feel? I think it's good, and I'm very sensitive. I mean, when I'm doing, even on What Would You Do, when some hero speaks up and says something really courageous when no one else would say anything, it brings tears to my eyes. And we'll, we have to compose ourselves and just step back for a second. I love that. that's why I do what I do. Where else can you get to feel all these different emotions of elation and sorrow and sadness, and then, get inspired by humanity, and they do wonderful things. So this guy, Jaime Jaramillo, who helped these kids, are you kidding? I mean, all the crew, all of us were tearing up when we saw what he was doing, and when he introduced us to these children down there. There was a baby that had been born 2 weeks before down in the sewer. Can you imagine? So I don't stop myself from getting emotional. I think it's good to get emotional. I remember when I covered the Space Shuttle Challenger when it exploded. I was in Florida covering this when the shuttle took off, and I was there with Krista McCullough's parents. She was a school teacher, remember, who was an astronaut who went up in the Challenger and died with those 7 astronauts. I had told the camera crew to stay on the parents' faces because I knew that we had the pictures of the shuttle from NASA. I wanted to see their reactions to their daughter. I didn't know this was going to happen, of course, but I wanted to see how proud they were. And those are the video that I think you see sometimes, even to this day, of their parents at first being very happy, and then being kind of confused when an announcement is made and you see the plumes, an explosion of some sort a mile up in the sky, and then shocked in their faces when they were told there's been a major malfunction. I remember I was told right after I saw that, they said, okay, you'll be on with Peter Jennings in 30 seconds. I mean, I had just witnessed the Challenger explode above my head, and I couldn't talk. I mean, I was so choked up. And during a commercial, Peter Jennings told me in my ear, he said, John, I know you're shaken up, young man, but get your act together and get a hold of yourself, you have to be able to report. Yes,
you were talking about the sewer children and the sugarcane and all of that. Would it be something like an instinct that you have to say, maybe we need to go check this out, or was it just like you're in the right place at the right time?
I think it's a little of both, but more of an instinct. I think more of an instinct. Because I know what a good story looks like. I know what I would want to see on television, and I'm drawn to stories that no one else is telling. I'm drawn to stories that no one else gives a damn about. I want to show that I care, and maybe I can tell it in a way that no one else can tell it. So it's always a challenge, but I'm just drawn to that. To this day, if there's something that I see somewhere, I will volunteer to go do a story, even if I'm overwhelmed with other work. I want to tell that story. Even the Mark Anthony story, which is really a celebrity story. Really, it's nothing deep about any huge story in this country. But he doesn't talk to anyone usually. He's very private. This is the first interview that he or Jennifer will do on television, and I kind of like that. I like the fact that I can tell a story that no one else is telling. So those are the stories I'm drawn to. Yes,
another what would you do question. Has there been a scenario on the show, the reaction of the Mark or whoever, has there been one that's really surprised you or impressed you that kind of stands out in your mind?
There have been many. I mean, every time we do one of these, someone, and it's usually a woman, something really amazing, heroic. Guys worry about a scenario becoming physical, right? Because we think the bad guy is going to turn on us, and we got to be ready and back off, and he might have a knife. Women don't seem to care about that. Women just, it's the maternal instinct or what, especially if children are involved. They don't have to give it a second thought. And it's really impressive. And maybe you know that a guy normally wouldn't attack you. I know that it happens, but maybe you don't think that would happen as much to a big guy stepping in. So one of my favorite ones was we were doing a piece. 3 Mexican guys had been killed in New York, in that New York area, by these racists who a couple of years ago would say, these young punks would go out and say, we're going to go Mexican hunting, and they would beat up anyone who looked Latino. In this case, beat up two Ecuadorians who weren't even from Mexico, right? And they killed one of them. And then they killed another guy 2 months later, and another guy a month later. So we did a scenario where we would have a Latino man getting beaten up. He was wearing padding, the baseball bats were plastic, his makeup was all, the blood was all makeup and a black eye. But it looked incredibly real. The question was, if he's getting the heck beat out of him on the sidewalk by these three thugs, will anybody walking by step in to help? And sure enough, we start rolling, and 7 guys come out of a bar, 7 big guys in suits, and they're watching it, and they're just shaking their heads. This guy's getting the hell beat out of him. And they might say, I think they say something like, oh, come on, man, stop that. But they keep walking, and they don't intervene. Why? I don't know. They just didn't want to get involved. Some Latino guys walked by. They didn't get involved. And I asked them later, and they said, they turn on me? Are you kidding? I'm not going to get involved in that. And then suddenly, we're about to give up, and this woman, this van pulls up, a minivan, with some kids, and a woman at the wheel. Can you stand up? She looked a lot like her. A lot like her. And she was that size, you know, maybe 100 pounds, soaking wet. She jumps out, and she gets between the bad guys and the victim. And she goes, now you guys stop. Just stop right now. And she starts, and she starts pushing the bad guys back. The guys have bats. And they're like, and we told them to cooperate. And she was amazing. Puerto Rican. And she said, when we came out, and I said, why did you get involved? She was driving. She stopped her van, jumped out of the thing, and confronted the bad guys. And she said, look, I happen to be Hispanic. That doesn't matter. This was wrong, what was happening. These are punks, and I wasn't going to stand for it. She left her kids in the van. It was really impressive. So that is one of my favorite ones. Also, the woman named Linda Hamilton. I don't know if you remember that one. We did a scenario where we had what would you do? You're going down the street, and you're rushing to work, right? It's like 8 o'clock. You're going to make a class, or you're going to catch a train. In this case, a train by the train station in New Jersey, Newark. And we have, what if you're walking down the sidewalk, and the person in front of you drops, falls, passes out? What do? Do you stop from your busy day to help or not? And when it was a well-dressed woman, people stopped within 4 seconds right away. She looked like a businesswoman, and they put a pillow under her head, and they covered up her coats, and they called 911, more importantly, and got an ambulance there quickly, right? So it was pretty impressive. And then we said, well, what would happen if instead of a well-dressed woman, we have a homeless guy who maybe he's holding a beer can, and he smells like liquor, and he's like 70 years old, and he's really dirty. So we have this actor, play the part of a homeless guy. And he drops. 78 people go by, and no one stopped. And then we're watching, like stunned. People are stepping over him. One woman made the sign of the cross as she went by him. But that's it. And one woman said, oh, it's a beautiful view of New Jersey, as she stepped over him. And then we're about to give up, kind of stunned that no one would help the homeless guy. When we see this, he was white. We see this African American. We hear the tapping of a cane on the sidewalk. And it's tap, 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 and into the frame of the picture, we see this woman slowly coming into the picture. Turns out she's partially paralyzed and she's walking with a cane. She's African American and she's homeless. So she stops and she says right away to people walking by, excuse me, do you have a cell phone that I can borrow? Excuse me. And no one stops, right? And she looks up to the heavens and just shakes her head, seemingly, so distressed that no one is willing to stop. And 22 more people go by. She then bends over and takes the beer can out of his hand, apparently to give him a little bit of dignity, right? And throws it in the trash can. And then she tells him, look, I don't know you, sir, but my name is Linda, and I'm going to name you Billy. And Billy, we told him not to say anything, so he's acting like he's passed out. She said, Billy, I'm not going to let anything happen to you, and I'm not going to leave your side until help comes. And it was so touching. We were watching all this, and she's like with her cane bent over. And finally, a woman stops and calls 911, and we break the scene. I come out. The cops already know, so they don't really have to show up, right? So I come out and I'll say, you know, it's all been part of what would you do. And it's very crazy at that moment. People are laughing and relieved that it's just a show, and excited that they're on camera. And so we get people sign releases, and in the midst of all that, she disappears. Linda Hamilton, the woman who helped. So we lose her. But anyway, we tell the story on What Would You Do? And the next day, after it airs, we got hundreds of phone calls and emails and Twitter and Facebook notices from people saying, who was she? We need to help her. We want to start a collection for her. Who was that woman? We knew her name was Linda Hamilton. So they created a Facebook page for her called Touched by Linda Hamilton, and they raised thousands of dollars. Now we have to find her to give her the money. So how do you find a homeless person, right? We went to shelters and liquor stores and train stations, and finally we found her, and our producers found her. So 2 weeks later, I go up and with a camera crew, and we meet her on the street, and I said, Linda, you caused quite a stir. She said, why? And I said, well, here, look at this. So I had my laptop, and I show her the piece. Because, of course, she hadn't seen it on television. She didn't even have a cell phone. So she looks at it, and she goes, hey, that's you. I said, yeah, it's kind of a big deal here. And then she says, oh, that's me. I said, yes. People are calling you an angel. Are you an angel? And she goes, John, look, this is my theory. I think God put me on that corner, on that sidewalk that day, so that I could teach people a lesson. I think this was all she's very religious. She said, God put me there, and that's why I did it. So we gave her a check for the money. We opened an account for her. We got her on Medicaid, which she qualified for but never got. We got her a place to live. And most importantly to her, we got her a cell phone. Jumping up and down for joy. But I usually, when I finish my speeches, I leave people with that thought of this woman, which is one of my favorite scenarios. You know, when you see something wrong out there, and the little voice in the back of your head says, do something, remember Linda Hamilton, this woman who was homeless, partially paralyzed, and she stopped and helped a homeless man, not because she was going to be on television, and not because she was going to get money. She had no idea that that was going to happen. She did it because her corazón, her heart, told her it was the right thing to do. So I love her story. All right, any more questions?
We don't have
out.
time. They need to be in class in about 3 or 4 more minutes.
Come on now.
But
Can
thank
we cancel?
you so much. Oh, I think we should. I think you're worth it.
Alicia, you were tearing up. So there are other classes come here after this?
Please finish filling out the white sheets and leave them here. Just pass them on down.
If you would please give us your feedback, we would really appreciate it. You can give it to the main group on your way out. Or Mr. McGill.
Sorry about the sports.
No, they need to have it now. They need this now.
Janelka. Okay. I was thinking Anna, could you do anything that someone had the jail to I should do? Could you take it back to the studio? Still have the tripod and usually the bag.
Thank you so much.
My class, my Monday, Wednesday, the female college. No, you don't.
Wait, I was like, okay. Wait a minute. Let me get clarification on that.
Well, I think it'd be really cool to get Denver.
Forget it now.
Started on the 4th by